Thank you very much. Waziri Deborah Baraza, Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Health, Kenya, heads of delegation here, the CDC Deputy Director, the WHO Country Director, Amit, and my good friend Emmanuel, and all attendees. Good morning. Let me begin by saying that I'm happy to be together with you today. I do not intend to take up much of your time. It's not my business to take up your time. You are the guys who are planning for the future. We have done our part. So ninimalize niende nikafanya yangu ya nyumbani na nyinyi muendelee. But let me begin by appreciating through you, Dr. Davis, the University of Nebraska and your entire team for inviting us to come and join you and to give some of our perspectives that could hopefully give our continent the ability to take charge of its health sector in collaboration with other international organizations, but more importantly with our own organizations such as our Africa CDC, as is represented here. And I'd like just to go back a little bit and recall the year 2020, which was the beginning of a very difficult time for us as a country, for the world, but also for me individually. When our world basically came to a standstill, taking everybody by complete surprise and forcing nations to begin to ask themselves when this pandemic would actually arrive at our respective doorsteps. As president at the time, and in consultation with my cabinet, we found it prudent, well before the disease was found within our borders, to set up the National Emergency Response Committee on Coronavirus. The role of this committee, chaired by the then Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe, was to help steer the country and to navigate the uncertain season with an emphasis on coordinating capacity building of medical personnel and other professionals to enable our country to respond quickly and effectively to any suspected cases or outbreak of the virus that would occur or could occur at that time anywhere in the Republic. Other roles of this committee included enhancing of surveillance at all our points of entry, preparation of national and county private isolation and treatment facilities, because we began by having immediate sessions, and I convened an immediate session with the Council of Governors to work on this. We began to coordinate the supply of testing kits that would be critical, looking out for medical products, supplies, pharmaceuticals, and masks, and other protective gear that were available within the Republic, as well as identifying isolation and treatment facilities, as you heard a little bit from Amit, who spoke before me. And all this we did knowing that sooner or later we would be confronted by the coronavirus. And all these measures we put in place in the month of February 2020, and indeed, as fate would have it, on the 13th of March, the same year, we got our first ever COVID-19 case, a 27-year-old woman who had just traveled to Kenya from London. This, ladies and gentlemen, marked the beginning of a long year, not only in the health sector, but throughout all sectors of Kenya's economy. It affected us economically, socially, and as all of you know, our Kenyan culture is founded on community, on gatherings, and these, unfortunately, became the first casualties. For we had to ban all public gatherings. We did initially give reprieve to churches and businesses at large because we were worried about what would happen to all those who were employed and working in these various sectors. But again, unfortunately, within no time, it became impossible to keep that going. And we had to pull the plug totally on all in-house kind of gatherings and proceeded to institute a total lockdown of the country. This was a very bitter pill for Kenyans to swallow, but it was a necessary measure to help curb the virus and protect the people of Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just highlight just some of the key measures that we took. Some of them, again, have been mentioned by some of the speakers before me, so I will not bother elaborating. But the first of these, as has been stated, was communication. Poor communication results in confusion. And as we all know, communication during such a season as COVID was very important. Keeping the people informed and giving hope as they wondered what would happen next. So as a government, we agreed that the National Emergency Response Committee would be solely responsible for all forms of communication around the pandemic. And to this end, I authorize that only the Cabinet Secretary for Health would speak on behalf of the government on all matters related to COVID to avoid any kind of misunderstanding or misinformation, and he became the single source of truth, so to say, about measures on the disease. The only other communication that was permitted was from yours truly, who would speak from time to time when landmark decisions needed to be made, especially those related to the lockdown, economic stimulus, and calls for calm, and so on. And as many of you will recall, I did endeavor in a good number of times to ensure that during those occasions, I was also flanked by leaders of the opposition to further reassure Kenyans that this was truly a national crisis. We did realize that this did contain the pandemic and the panic, especially in these times of social media, but it also ensured that as a government, we controlled the narrative. With regard to health, occasioned by the big number of COVID patients, it became imperative for us to upgrade a good number of our health facilities to help with patient control. The public sector, private sector, as well as our military, all joined forces in handling the ballooning number of patients. As a government, we went ahead and put in resources, redid and rejigged our budget in order to be able to build additional hospitals and to increase the capacity of existing medical facilities. We also, at the time, knew that we were not financially prepared and we needed to source funding for us to be able to deal or take the measures that we needed to take. And this happened, and as again has been said, one of the main challenges of the lockdown was that it resulted also in our revenue collections dwindling at a time when the country needed these resources the most. And we had to grapple consistently with how we were going to finance our operations, but at the same time keep the nation moving. So as a government, we created a COVID-19 fund, a kitty that would fund emergency response towards containing the spread, its effects and impacts. But we also said in sharing the burden occasioned by this pandemic, we said we had to lead from the front, and myself as president and the deputy president took an immediate salary cut of 80% of our salaries. Cabinet secretaries, I don't know whether they were happy or not, but I ordered that they take 30% cuts. And principal secretaries and other top officials, we gave them the chance to volunteer to take 20% pay cuts in order to show that commitment and leadership starts at the top. We also called on well-wishers, and in this regard, I really want to thank our Kenyan private sector, because despite the challenges that they themselves were facing, they came out strongly in support to ensure that at least the most vulnerable were able to put food on their tables. This especially because a huge part of our Kenyan workforce was casual. And many of our urban citizens rely on a daily income to sustain themselves. And we recognize this, because those casuals, with many of them now at home as a result of the lockdown, and who depended on that daily income to feed themselves, now had basically no source of income. And the big question became, how could we effectively look after this part of our population? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how my government came up with the Kazi Mtaani program. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Thank you very much. Waziri Deborah Baraza, Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Health, Kenya. Heads of delegation here. The CDC Deputy Director, the WHO Country Director, Amit, and my good friend Emmanuel, and all attendees. Good morning. Let me begin by saying that I'm happy to be together with you today. I do not intend to take up much of your time. It's not my business to take up your time. You are the guys who are planning for the future. We have done our part. So ninimalize niende nikafanya yangu ya nyumbani na nyinyi muendelee. But let me begin by appreciating through you, Dr. Davis, the University of Nebraska and your entire team for inviting us to come and join you and to give some of our perspectives that could hopefully give our continent